With 6v6 officially approved to be tested and implemented into Overwatch 2, it really begs the question, how do we avoid many of the problems that we ran into with 6v6 in the past, and what does this mean for the future of Overwatch? In this video, it's going to be breaking down everything you need to know about 6v6, and it's also going to be a guide on how to implement it properly so we don't run into the many failures of the past. But press that subscribe button and let me know down below how you feel about 6v6. Happy, sad, cautiously optimistic, or anything in between? Let me know. Long time looking for a cool server in GTA 5 RP? Then I have great news for you. Grand Roleplay is the absolute best choice. Develop a system of factions, a huge fleet of cars, a bunch of cool clothes for any modernist. All of this is collected here. The most important advantage is that you could start playing for free, literally in a couple of clicks. The first thing that you need to do is follow the link in the description to the project website, fill out all the fields, and create your character. It's very important to register through the website because that way you get one of the free premium cards you choose from right at the beginning of the game. The main thing to do is to not forget to enter my ID in a special field, which will give you a nice bonus in the form of game currency and VIP status for a quick start. There's a Halloween event going on right now in the server that you're definitely going to want to check out. Now that's not all, especially for those of you who do not like to sit at a PC for a long time. There's a mobile version of the game released as well. This is a real analog of GTA 5 in your phone created by the same team of developers. So do not forget to enter my promo code, which will immediately give you one of the rare items, which will definitely help you to not die of boredom at the beginning of the game. Don't miss your chance. Register, get bonuses, and enjoy the game both on PC and your phone. We're waiting for you, so check it out in the links down below, and let's get back to the video. Now, it's important to understand that there are two different modes that they are trying in 6v6, and the first one is the min 1 max 3. So we could have like 3 tanks, 2 supports, 1 DPS, 3 DPS, probably gonna happen, 2 supports, 1 tank. That's probably gonna be the most common. And this version is going to do a couple things. It's going to allow the compositions to be more flexible in how they are set up and how they look. And it's going to help solve some of the queue time problems because players are probably going to sign up for a flex queue, or there isn't even going to be role lock. It's just going to be not able to continue unless someone from every single role is selected. And at the same time, it solves the GOATs problem. You're not going to have 3 tanks, 3 support compositions that are really hard to bounce around. So these are some of the cons to something like this, or some of the features. But there's also going to be some huge cons as well, and I think the biggest one is the competitive integrity of it. We talked about the triple DPS composition that we see. That's going to be pretty standard place, and you saw that a lot when there was no role lock, where you would often rarely have 1 tank, and it would be like a hog or a wrecking ball, which was actually decent if you're doing solo tank. But yeah, you're just going to run into a lot of these problems. And with tanks not created or designed to be solo tanks anymore, you know, a lot of the tanks are going to have to get rebalanced, so it's not going to really work in that solo tanking environment. And I really think that as a whole, while this mode might be fresh and fun for a bit, it's not going to be that competitive compared to the traditional role lock mode. That being said, it's still probably more competitive than no role lock, so yeah. I'm kind of curious about how you feel about this one in the comments down below. Now, 222 is the other mode that they're going to be trying, the primary mode with 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports. And it's going to be the mode that we're going to be assuming is going to be the dominant mode going forward, because it's the mode that everyone has played in the past and the mode that a lot of people want back. But even though we're finally pulling the trigger on testing 222, which I think is a great idea, there are a lot of problems that 222 had that need to be addressed and solved. And there are some huge new problems that have come up since we left 6v6 that also need to be solved. Number 1, and most importantly, is the queue time problem. There was huge problems at the end of 6v6, especially as development was tailored towards Overwatch 2, and the interest in player population in comp games started decreasing. Tanks suffered the most as the least popular role. Tank players, while they could get a game, had some huge discrepancies between the ranks within their game, where you could be playing with someone that is many ranks apart from you, varying up and down at a really crazy rate. And we saw this when we had like diamond players in GM lobbies as a tank, and it just created like all kinds of problems back in Overwatch 1. Now, for everyone else, players had crazy queue times, especially DPS players. If you were in the Masters rank or above, you would wait like 10 plus hours. And if you were in Grandmaster, especially if you played like any of the late night hours, you just weren't getting a game. Like 18-minute queues, 20-minute queues, 30-minute queues, it could go just crazy. This is why like the last 6 to 12 months of Overwatch 1, I just stopped playing the game entirely because I could not sit there in queue for 20 minutes after I just ate a loss. Like I just couldn't. I couldn't do it. But now that we're going back, how do we fix this problem? Is there any way that we can lessen this problem, make it better? Well, I think that there's some simple solutions that we could do that might alleviate it a little bit. You get some type of point system or some comp skins, give people some skins or special things for playing tank. These are things that could like encourage people to play tank. Now, whether or not that makes it so people that aren't caring about winning on tank are playing the tanking role, that's another problem entirely, and it might encourage people to grind tank that just don't give a shit. I think we saw this the most when we had the priority pass system, and I think that it's incredibly risky trying to carrot and stick players into playing tank. But the thing that I've always said is they need to implement more tank heroes and more interesting hero designs. They've actually done this in Overwatch 2 with characters like Junker Queen, characters like Ramatra, and I really do think that because there was so many characters in the attack and defense roles in DPS, that role just had so many characters on launch relative to tanks and supports that there just wasn't enough interest. Like, tanking is a role that is kind of inherently selfless, where you are taking on a lot of responsibilities that other roles just don't have to do, painful responsibilities, and you add on to that less interesting characters, less dynamic characters, less diversity of characters, and it's just gonna make the role less popular. So adding new heroes, designing more heroes, more interesting heroes, this is going to help the tank queue problem. But it's a problem that can't be solved instantly. Blizzard can't go and whip up like 10 characters out of nowhere. It's something that has to happen over time, and you also need to implement characters in other roles or those roles get mad. So it's not an easy solution here, and while I think they have made steps towards it, I don't think it's necessarily enough. And if you want to help queue times in 6v6 for the foreseeable future, you need to ramp up the dial on creating interesting tanks more than the other roles. But of course, that's a more long-term solution, not a short-term one. But it's also important to understand that because Overwatch is free to play, there's a lot of players that are playing this game and picking it up and grinding it. And if 6v6 comes back, there'll probably be a surge of other people coming back and grinding it. And this means that we're not going to really run into those crazy queue time problems that we saw at the end of Overwatch 1, where there was a lot of lacking development and people were kind of abandoning the game in anticipation of Overwatch 2. And while that won't completely solve the queue time problem, there will still be these longer queue times. Really, the core solution to the tank queue problem is that we just don't fix it and just accept these problems. Like, we are gonna have above average queue times, especially higher ranked players, and I think like a lot of players are super spoiled having like 30-second queue times in a game like Valorant, but really there's a lot of games that have really long queue times. I mean, if you think about the history of like Hearthstone, that game got big off of high ranked players in League of Legends waiting for their games. They just played that in queue, and unlike a lot of other games, there is so much stuff you can do while you're in queue in Overwatch. There's the workshop mode with so many different modes to practice or just have fun. So I think like a lessening of the queue times to make it passable, and then people just accepting that some of these queue time problems are just gonna have to exist if we want 6v6 back, which I think a lot of people do want to at least try going back to 6v6, and understand that with that, not every problem is going to be perfectly solvable. Some things we're just going to have to accept and move forward from. Now, the other big elephant in the room is the passives. We have an anti-CC passive for tanks, anti-headshot passive, less ultimate generation. We got health regen for every single hero and more, and these passives kind of have to be decided what we do with them, right? Are we going to maintain some of these passives? Are we going to remove them all because they weren't in old 6v6? Is there some healthy number? I think that the health regeneration passive has been a really big win for a lot of people, but maybe it's too strong in a 6v6 environment. Maybe you have to tone it down. Maybe people are going to want it just completely gone. There's a lot of question marks here. Like, are some of these passives good enough to stay? How do they need to be changed to make them fair? And does it dramatically change the balance of 6v6 if you keep these passives in that we've only added since Overwatch 2? Definitely a ton of questions that I think are gonna require trial and error. A lot of changes, rapid changes, and it's gonna be something that needs to be a constant work in progress, because I don't really think the solution is just to remove all the passives. That's a reversion to the past way, but I think that there's a lot of things that we learned about things we like and how the gameplay functions, and hiding behind like a little brick or a wall for like 10 seconds and being able to get healed regardless of whether your support is paying attention to you, I think most people enjoy. I think most people think that's a dub, and that's at least one that could change. But then there's the whole argument about CC, and there was problems with CC back in 6v6. How is the CC, the crowd control argument or state of crowd control in Overwatch, going to be going to a 6v6 format? Do we want to just turn it all back on? Do we want to allow a Cassidy to stun again? Do we want to enable all this crazy CC, or do we want to still make it so that Overwatch is less CC but under 6v6? There's all these questions about the new fusing with the old. Are we reverting back, or are we trying to incorporate these new elements into a 6v6 format to make it better? I don't know the perfect answer here. Now, on top of that, new hero balancing is a really crazy thing because some heroes are going to need to be balanced completely different. We have heroes that would create busted combos as a tank duo, and they might just be completely impossible to stop. We have like Mauga Sigma, Mauga Ryan, Doom Wrecking Ball. Some of these could be really fun, and I don't think balance needs to be perfect at the start, but we could easily see how some of these become just completely busted and dominant. We saw that a lot in Overwatch 1 where certain tank combinations just became incredibly powerful, and I just imagine that that would be true now. Like, a lot of people have been doing some of the 6v6 testing, playing in the workshop code and kind of trying to make assumptions, but it's so hard to know exactly what compositions will rise up after they're grinded enough. People are really trying to win. There's a rank system, not to mention Blizzard could just balance the game completely different than a lot of these workshop codes. So the way forward here is that Blizzard needs to be on the ball in balance and rebalance. They have to be constantly changing numbers, constantly trying to figure out what people like, how the community is solving certain things, and they need to be very responsive to that. We can't even have something even remotely similar to the type of balance that was going on in Overwatch 1. It's going to be more balance and changes than we've ever seen, and that's the only way to kind of go towards something that is balanced, makes sense, doesn't have these super frustrating meta compositions or strategies that just kind of dumb down the game, like double shield as an example in Overwatch 1. And in this regard, I actually am a bit hopeful because in Overwatch 2, Blizzard has been on the ball with changes and balance and additions. I just really fear here because it's gonna be almost impossible to do both. Like, with all of this going, all this resources going to 5v5 right now and in Overwatch 2, imagine if they tried to do 5v5 and 6v6. It would be like double the work easily. It's like a crazy amount of work, and I don't really think Blizzard wants to like crazy ramp up all of their staff and do all that stuff. So it feels like doing both systems properly is impossible. I don't imagine that when the dust settles on this entire experiment and whatever we move forward with, it's gonna be 5v5 or 6v6. I don't imagine it could be both, and if they try to do both, I think they're going to do both poorly because you need constant changes, constant adjustment, constant balance for both sides if you want to make them competitive or fun. And I see some people in the community saying, oh, just let people pick what they want to do, implement both, and I really think that's going to just make a bad both systems. They're just going to both be non-functional because imagine 5v5 right now, but with half the balance updates that we've been getting or even less. It would just be really, really frustrating and difficult to play because we've run into a lot of problems that they have been on the ball with and really fixed very quickly, and I've been grateful for that. So that's what I'm really afraid of. I don't really think both systems is possible. Now, we also got to talk about the massive HP buff that we got in Season 9. I think most people would agree that this needs to be reverted going into 6v6. There would be way too much HP, and a lot of people think it should just be reverted in 5v5 as well, which I could actually get behind. In combination with the HP regen passive, it really does slow the game down too much, and in a 6v6 environment, it would just kind of bring things to a crawl. And to give you some insight into my overall Overwatch game philosophy, I think characters should in general die fast, but not instant. So I'm not a fan of instantly deleting things, one-shots, and things like that. I think those could be reduced to a minimum, but that's not the same thing as dying very fast. There should not be this constant trading of resources that happens over the course of 5 minutes for a team fight to end, but also team fight should not end in like a one-shot, like right away. But I also do think that Blizzard needs to have some serious discussions internally about standardizations of HP and what HP certain heroes have, especially when referring to breakpoints. We've kind of moved the dial on a million characters HP, and I would like some amount of standardization in that regard, some amount of consistency in that regard. Like, come on, if you're gonna have Mei A have 300 HP and a goddamn heal and a shield and a wall, just make her a tank, okay? But the other part of this is the community feedback and how people will enjoy 6v6. And I'm going to make a prediction here that everyone is going to basically universally love 6v6. New, old, people will try it coming back. Everyone's going to really love it. And this is going to be in spite of its flaws. I think when something new comes out, something exciting, especially when something that people have been pining for a while, the support is just going to be 100%. It doesn't really matter what the flaws are of the system, especially at the start. People are going to love it. And then what does Blizzard do in the face of that overwhelming support? If people love it, what do? Do they embrace 6v6 and kill 5v5? They could do that, but it's going to be kind of odd because they can't go back again. I don't really think that's going to work. So it's a little tricky because it doesn't really matter how the game is balanced or the problems. People are going to love 6v6, and then Blizzard is going to have no choice but to embrace it. I don't really know where we go from there. And what does this mean for ranks and pro play? Right now, we have a lot of collegiate and pro teams that are like 5 people. In like college, there's 5 computers. There's a 5-man team. What happens to that? I guess maybe it doesn't care. Maybe at the end of the day, competitive integrity comes second to fun, and we just kind of are willing to move past some of this. But you gotta think about the fact that this is a band-aid that you can't rip off, and I do imagine that a lot of problems are gonna come from this that we just aren't really gonna foresee. But even still, I'm really excited to see how that all plays out. It's gonna be interesting for sure. Let me know if you have any predictions down below. Now, the next thing, the elephant in the room kind of, is what happens to Doom? Do we just keep him as a tank, or do we move him back to DPS? On one hand, a lot of people want him back as a DPS, but on the other hand, he created a lot of problems in the DPS role, both being massive CC and one-shots. A lot of people really were frustrated with Doom, even if there's a huge community of players that love DPS Doom, myself included. He was one of my best DPS back in the day. And we also created a new community of people that enjoy Tank Doom, so removing Tank Doom also seems kind of weird. And then having a DPS and a Tank Doom is also very, very weird. But another part of this is like the excitement of trying new tank combos with Doom. Zarya Doom, gonna be extremely fun. Ball Doom, I think, could be amazing. So there's some extra potential here that I think is really, really fun. But I think for a lot of people that really want just Overwatch 1 back, especially for DPS Doom players, it's not gonna be back. And maybe that kind of ruins the magic for some of these players. The other question is, should we hero swap or change anything else? Characters like Sombra, Hanzo, Widow, Roadhog. There's a lot of these problematic heroes where if you move over to a 6v6 system, you could say, okay, we're going to change all these heroes now in preemptive to move to 6v6 because some of these heroes have caused problems. We've actually changed these heroes quite a bit. So do you want to revert them? Do we want everything to be back how it was? Or do we want to change these things up? Or do we want to further change these things up? Like, does Roadhog go back to the old version of Roadhog? Does he get all of that hook power back? Does he get enabled in the same way he was before because there's other ways to deal with him and shut him down, and he's an off tank now? He doesn't have to be a main tank. So how does that work? And then with the one shots with Hanzo and Widow, and maybe we say, hey, we don't even really want one shots back, but does that change how these characters should be balanced? There's like all these questions around whether or not we just revert the clock back and go back to 6v6 Overwatch 1, or do we move forward as a 6v6 Overwatch 2, 2.53, something completely different? I don't really know what the perfect solution here is because there was a certain amount of magic in Overwatch 1 that I think they're trying to capture, and a lot of people might say, hey, you implemented 6v6, but you didn't do it like they did in Overwatch 1, and it sucks. So that's probably one of the big things that they're struggling with internally. What do they do when it comes to all these changes and reworks and various things that they've done throughout the course of Overwatch 2 when we revert back to 6v6? To continue that point, what about the tanks that we've changed? Rein double fire strike, which I think a lot of Rein players really like. Being able to cancel your charge. Are we going to allow that? Winston being able to tase. Double bubble on Zarya. Probably not going to be able to be still in the game, but you can see some of these little tiny changes that have actually created more depth and strategy to these characters, especially like I love the fact that Ron can cancel his charge. I love the fact he has 2 fire strikes. Maybe you just weaken his power level and you keep him in the same state, but maybe that's too powerful. This is like all these big question marks involving the changes of heroes and the change back of heroes. We don't really know the perfect solution. I want to hear how you feel about all of that in the comments down below. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the timing here. It's very interesting timing that they are going to be testing 6v6 around the time that Marvel Rivals comes out, the 6th of December. It's kind of funny because Rivals kind of poses the biggest threat at stealing Overwatch players, just because players want to try it as kind of a revulsion, a pushback against Overwatch, against Blizzard. It's a game that is going to do native 6v6. It's a game that looks like it's prioritizing fun over the super hyper competitiveness that a lot of people think that Overwatch should have never really embraced. So I am interested in how Rivals is going to do, and for full transparency, I'm going to be creating a lot of content on Rivals as well, but I also want to create a lot of 6v6 content, and I'm interested at the future of Overwatch. So it's curious timing. It's interesting. I wonder how this all is going to play out. I wonder if Rivals is going to do really well. I actually hope it does really well so that it encourages Blizzard to even step up the game further, but we'll have to wait and see, and I'm very curious to find out how everything plays out. But let me know how you feel about 6v6. Are you excited for it? Do you think it could have some consequences for Overwatch? And how do you feel about the future of Overwatch going into 2025 and the entire next year? Do me a huge solid and press the subscribe button and let me know what videos you want to see on this channel. And I thank you. I'll see you next time.